I want to welcome you all to our sponsorship workshop. My name is Jim. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to see all of you here tonight. This meeting has turned out to be a real joy. If you haven't been with us before in this workshop, we are all working toward being better and more confident sponsors. We study the big book and where to find everything, how it all fits together. And we study the steps and how to teach the steps. And we study the traditions and how to teach the traditions. And the workshop lasts about 35 or 38 weeks. I think we're about halfway through now. For the last 2 weeks, we've been doing a review of the 12 steps. And tonight we're going to conclude that review, where Tom here is producing a CD, which is to be included in a book that's going to be published. And the publisher asked for us to prepare a summary of the steps, because the book will encompass the 12 steps. And everybody agreed that we could do that here in this workshop. We've reviewed the first 7 steps. I think we got started with 8, but we'll take a look at 8 again tonight and then go on through. And tonight we should finish up with our review of the steps, and then next week we'll pick up where we left off in the big book. This is an AA meeting. We follow sort of an abbreviated format. The meeting is an hour and a half in length, and we take a 10-minute break at the halfway point. So let's start the meeting with a moment of silent meditation, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you. Thank you. Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, and may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And there are no dues or fees for a membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, nor wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober, help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And it's customary and traditional in our group to read a portion of Chapter 5 from the Big Book. Who'd like to do that tonight? Go ahead, Dan.
My name is Keith.
Hold on just a minute now, Keith. Everybody open your books up, please, to page 58. Remember that we teach our sponsees to follow along with the reading of the 5th chapter. We teach them to bring their big books to every meeting. This is their manual. This is the book that they're going to be able to be helpful to others. Go ahead, Keith.
Chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They're not at fault, they seem to have been born that way. They're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these we walked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go, absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. And here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order, I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is, we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. A description of the alcoholic, the chapter of the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if he were sought.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. All right. It's absolutely imperative that as sponsors, we remember certain basic truths about our program, about Alcoholics Anonymous, about meetings, about the big book, and about our job, our mission in carrying the steps to other people. It is our job to help them recover. These things are so fundamental, and I think sometimes it's just simply slips our minds. We get busy with other things. We maybe get distracted. We get caught up in sponsorship as a dynamic between 2 people rather than as a teacher-student relationship, which it needs to be. The teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. Teaching here doesn't mean being professorial. It doesn't mean being spiritually arrogant or superior. It means that we teach what we know so that the person who comes next can also recover, can also have the wonderful blessings that we've had. The 12 steps are the only program of recovery which we offer. We don't have anything else here. We've got all kinds of fellowship going on, and that's wonderful stuff. We've got meetings upon meetings upon meetings, and most of them have almost zero impact on anybody. Meetings which center on problems anonymous meetings, can have not only no positive effect, but a negative effect. And yet we're surrounded by that stuff. Meetings which concentrate themselves on things which are not the big book and not the steps, that go way off afield somewhere, are no better than an encounter group at a treatment center. And so there's a lot that sponsors have to do, because we're going to be working with people who are not getting a whole lot of help when they go to meetings. And our job is to insist with them that their recovery is dependent upon their willingness to work the steps. And our job is to teach them the steps. The big book is so clear about this, that everything in the book was written to show us how the first 100 worked the steps. And they recovered. And they're saying to us that if you will do what we did, we are certain that you will be able to recover also. They don't give us any other means of recovery. They didn't need to. The 12 steps work perfectly. They work perfectly for anybody who's willing to use them. So when we look at the steps, we must look at them as a spiritual program of action which inevitably will lead from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial to a place of a spiritual awakening, to a place of surrender and obedience to the will of a loving God. When we look at them that way, then we will realize that you can't take any particular step and make it stand out. They don't stand alone. None of them do. They all stand together. It's a synergism. It is a continuum. It's a journey from this place of rebellion to the place of surrender. And therefore, each step has its place within that continuum. Each step fits with all of the other steps. None of them stand alone. Each step builds for the ones that will follow and depends upon the ones which came before. So we cannot look at the steps in any sense as being standalone entities. Together, the 12 steps constitute spiritual principles which have been around forever. But here in the steps, these spiritual principles have been restated as steps of action, things that we do rather than things that we think or just talk about. And because they are steps of action, they are unique in the whole field of spirituality, of religion, of philosophy. Nowhere else will you find the spiritual principles that we must incorporate in our lives if we wish recovery and spiritual growth. Nowhere else will you find those spiritual principles stated as things we must do. Rather, they are always stated as things we must believe or things we must think. But when you teach the steps, you're teaching people what to do. You're teaching them how to use these tools of recovery, this simple kit of spiritual tools. That requires a teacher. There are mechanics involved. There are things, directions which need to be followed. And every bit of the steps is logical, the logical progression from one to the next. And you can see it when you see the overall picture. For example, we're going to be talking tonight and reviewing the 8th and 9th steps, the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps. We already know that those steps are coming. They must come because they fit at the upper end of this pattern which is developing all the way through the steps. When we took our 3rd step, we asked God to take away our difficulties. But we didn't know what those difficulties were at that time. We knew that things were dreadfully wrong, but we didn't know what was wrong. We asked Him to take away our difficulties so that we could be an example to others of His power working in our lives. There remained, therefore, the job of finding out what these difficulties are. What is our present circumstances? What are our present circumstances? Therefore, we set out on a vigorous course of action, the big book says, and we do an inventory. And in that inventory, we will find out what our defects of character are, What are those twists and turns of our brain which have been occasioned by overwhelming fear? We also, in our inventory, are going to find out whom we have harmed. And during this process of finding out whom we have harmed, we will also become willing to make amends to them all. So that therefore, in our fourth step, we are accomplishing two major goals. One is to find out what it is that's wrong with us that we can't fix ourselves, and what is it that we have done that's harmed others where we need to set matters straight. Most people don't even know that the fourth step contains the eighth step, almost in its entirety. And yet that's the truth of it. And once we have determined what it is that's wrong with us, whom we have harmed, then we take all of this knowledge and we do a fifth step where we admit what we have learned. And in the admission, we accomplish a highly, highly important spiritual act. This business of admitting, articulating, saying out loud what we have found is something which leads inevitably to the coming of humility, the coming of honesty, and the doing away with fear. And also it is the major step in the direction of a spiritual awakening. The fifth step is something which is ancient. It comes down to us through all spiritual writings. Every religion has variations of this very, very important requirement that we admit to another human being as well as to God and ourselves exactly what it is that's wrong with us. Once having done the inventory and having done the fifth step, we are then in possession of a priceless thing. We know now what's wrong with us, and we have admitted it, and now we're ready to take these things to God and ask Him to take them away. And until we've done our work, we don't go to God and ask Him to remove our defects because we don't know what they are yet. We haven't done our part. We haven't done our work. You see how the fourth step and the fifth step come together to prepare us to now go to God and ask God for the miracle, this wonderful gift of straightening out our minds, which He does. Remember that by the time we reach the 10th step, we will have been restored to sanity. Now there was another whole set of things which was blocking us from God. It wasn't just our defects of character and our insanities, but it was also all this guilt we were carrying around. And that's why we have to, in our fourth step, we have to find out whom we've harmed and become willing right then to set matters straight if we can. In our fifth step, we're going to admit what we have done. And in the sixth and seventh step, we're seeking relief from our defects. In the eighth and ninth steps, we're seeking relief from our guilts. Because keep in mind that our guilts block us from God just as surely as do our defects and our insanities. And so the eighth step turns out to be, by the time we get there, it's mostly already done because we did it when we took our fourth step. Now, as a sponsor, you should remember that sometimes the fourth step will, even though it's followed very carefully, may miss a couple of people. So we tell our sponsees to go back over this thoroughly and make sure that there's nobody that they need to include. And almost always they'll find a couple more amends that have to be made. Then, as a sponsor, we say, okay, now read pages 76 through 83, that covers the ninth step, and write down what amends you believe would be appropriate that you need to make. And then we'll go over that and we'll decide together what amends you are to make and how you are to make them. So our job here then is to review the amends they're going to make and make sure that we have instructed them on the basic points of amends making. For example, it is quite clear that we cannot make an amends in our ninth step if someone else is going to be harmed. Certainly not without their permission. And this cuts really right across the board with all the amends that we need to make. An example would be, suppose that we need to make amends to a family that we have hurt deeply over a long period of years. It would be a terrible mistake to go to them and sit them down for 3 hours with a parade of the horribles, making them relive every rotten, nasty, stinking, dirty thing we ever did. That would be a terrible mistake. And so we keep it short, we keep it to the point. And we recognize that with family, we may have to be making amends for the rest of their lives, or the rest of our life. By not only by living a sober way of life, but by being the kind of person, family member, that will be an addition to the family and a strength and a spiritual guide to the family, an inspiration. In marital matters, or in matters where we have perhaps have cheated on a spouse or a loved one, there are many times when we are not permitted to make this amends, to just jump up and give the names of the other party and talk about how wonderful it was, but we're really sorry anyway, and all that stuff. Usually that's very bad to do, because the big book says jealousy is the most terrible human emotion, plus the fact that that third party is very likely to catch the brunt of the anger and the jealousy, and we don't have any right to do that. There are other instances where we are forbidden to make amends. For example, where we have committed a criminal act, and we know we've never been caught, never been charged, nobody's looking for us, but we did it anyway. Now we've got a whole new family, we've got a new way of life, we've got people who count on us. We would, in order for us to be shriven of our guilt, our inclination is to want to be, the big book calls a martyr, and run in and say, here I am, incarcerate me. And that might be okay in some instances, but if we have people who are counting upon us, who need us, who will be seriously harmed by our incarceration or even prolonged time in trial, we have to go to them first and tell them frankly what happened and ask their permission before we do that. We may have to just live with it. A lot of times there are amends that we cannot make. Another thing that we remember and we make sure that we teach our sponsees is that there is no such thing as going into amends expecting or seeking forgiveness. That's not the point at all. The point of making amends is to be freed from the guilt which is blocking us from God. And therefore, our approach is not begging for forgiveness, but forthright admission of the things which we have done, and a demonstration of our how sorry we are about it, and our willingness to set matters straight if we can. And so we are not permitted to harm somebody else in our making our amends. And as a sponsor, it's our job to make sure that ain't going to happen. Big Book says we clean off our side of the street, which means simply this: if I'm making amends to you and you were equally harmful to me, or maybe the scales are way tilted on your side, I'm still not permitted to bring that up. I don't criticize you. I don't excuse myself based upon what you have done. I simply talk about what I've done, express how sorry I am for it, and ask if there's something I can do to be helpful. And so there are these rules that must be followed. And that rule that we cannot do anything to harm another person is a set rule. It cuts all the way through our lives and everything that we do. There's a corollary, by the way, which most people don't understand or are not taught, that we're not permitted to allow another person to harm us. That's also a spiritual rule. Why? Because when we're being harmed, we're being blocked from God. What's the whole point of all this? Therefore, if someone is harming us, we say, "Stop right there." We'll have none of this. And if you can't get it stopped, you got to get away. We do not permit another person to harm us ever again. Everybody in this room at one time or another was a victim. If you stop and think about it, you'll realize that in order to get your own way, decisions based on self, rationalized for you that it was okay to be a victim, to let others get away with it, to take their abuse in order to get what you wanted, to be part of the gang, to be accepted. Some victimization is very subtle, others is very overt, but nevertheless, we have all compromised and we've settled. We're not going to do that anymore. We just won't. And we teach our sponsees, you get up on your own 2 feet and you stand on your own 2 feet and you face life yourself and you go through life, you and God together. And other people in your life, that's fine, but you never lose your dependency on God and God alone. Never more do you allow yourself to become dependent on another human being, ever. This dependency that we've allowed to happen in our lives has been a killer. And as a sponsor, you're going to find it over and over and over again. Bill Wilson said, and he meant it, and he learned the hard way this was true. He said that every disturbance I have, great or small, at the root of it is some unhealthy dependency that I've allowed to develop. And he said, along with its consequent, frustrated I wants. In other words, expectations. Stop and think. How many people are in your life right now where you have allowed unarticulated, unenunciated expectations to develop? They should do this, and they shouldn't do that. And all your bright-eyed friends will agree with you. Well, of course, he shouldn't do that. Did you ever talk to him about it? No, you see, we can take these expectations and we make a whole religion out of them. We build our whole moral structure around these expectations, both of others and of ourselves. And we're going to teach our sponsees, don't do that. Put it aside. And this means that life becomes so much better. It's such a simple way to live, you know. You get up in the morning, you write down what you got going today, you ask God for help with it and direct your thinking today, you pray and meditate a little while, and you go out and meet the day. Do the next right thing. Do what's on your plate to be done. Don't harm another person, and for God's sakes, leave the results up to Him. And when we do that, it doesn't matter then what the results are, does it? We get to go to bed tonight feeling successful. You want to feel successful? Do what you're supposed to do every day. Leave the results up to God. Then you'll feel successful. And you go to bed with an easy heart. So simple. It's so hard to do because it's so completely opposite to everything we've ever been taught. We've been taught to force our way through life, to make things happen, to be tough, to be manipulative, to be the smartest person around, to accumulate all the trappings of power and insist upon people bowing and scraping to us, especially if we're paying their salary. It's all phony. And it was supposed to be that very thing which was going to give us security and happiness. And it was a terrible lie right from the very beginning. Never, never, never worked. Our security and our happiness is all a function of a spiritual awakening and maintaining ourselves on a spiritual path. The big book says that God wants us to keep our head in the clouds with Him, but our feet firmly planted on earth where our work is. And it tells us that we have a heritage, and our heritage is to be happy, joyous, and free. That we get to have that. We have to work for it. And you hold these things out for your sponsees. Show them what is out there for them. A whole rebirth, a whole new way of thinking, a new way of living their lives. A way of living free of fear, living in faith instead of fear. And it's all there. They get to have it, we get to have it. When we were back there in the third step, we learned something else. That God was going to give us everything we need if we stay close to Him and perform His work well. Now, of course, we weren't close at that time, were we? We were still blocked off by our defects, insanities, and guilt. But we were taught right then that if we stay close to God and perform His work well, He'll give us everything we need. And that happens to be literally true. And so we work the first 9 steps in order to achieve that. Where do we find in the big book that we have entered the world of the Spirit? That's in the 10th step, isn't it? Where do we find in the big book that we have been restored to sanity? It's the 10th step and the 11th step, isn't it? Where do we learn in the big book that we have developed a vital 6th sense? Right between 10 and 11, isn't it? And where do we learn in the big book that we become God conscious? Right there in the same place. So now we see, okay, let's get through these first 9 steps, and then we can look forward to the promises coming true, to our restoration to sanity, to the obsession, compulsion to drink having been taken from us, entering the world of spirit, becoming God conscious, developing a 6th sense, which means that we have now a direct entree to God. We can be inspired. We can be moved intuitively because we have been opened up. We have now hopped into God's pocket, and as long as we stay there, we're going to be perfectly safe. And so now it says that we're going to have to stay close to God and perform His work well. That means 10, 11, and 12. Those are the steps which we're going to use for the rest of our lives to stay close to God and perform His work well. In the process, we will continue to grow spiritually, which we must do. There's no sitting still, ever. We will become disciplined and consistent. We will do what we are supposed to do every day. We will recognize that spirituality is a daily process, not something we can put in the bank and save up for a rainy day. That our program today doesn't do a thing for us tomorrow. That every day is a day when we must surrender as we go through the day. We're going to surrender in prayer. We're going to surrender in meditation. We're going to surrender by virtue of our being willing to help others, turning our thoughts to others we can help. That's why the big book says that every day is a day when we must carry a vision of God's will for us into all our activities, and that all we have is a daily reprieve. That's it. But it's a miracle that we have that. This deadly, incurable, progressive illness has been placed in full, complete, absolute remission. And now we have the tools, the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps to keep it there, if we but use them. And this is where everybody starts to fall apart. As sponsors, you want to redouble your efforts with your sponsees. Have them bring you their 10th step notebook so you can see that they're taking inventory during the day. Have them bring you their journal that they do every night, so you can see that they're answering the questions and they're taking good care of themselves and they're staying current with what's going on in their lives. Question them about the people that they're sponsoring or who have asked them to sponsor. Question them about their meditation and their prayer life and make sure that they're doing it. Make sure they're getting to a meeting every day. Every day. Why would you miss? If you want to do God's work, where are you going to find the people who need your help? I don't know of any place but in the meetings. Oh, you can run down to your local outpatient treatment center, I suppose. God save you if you're trying to help people who are so doped up they're walking around like zombies. But nevertheless, there are opportunities there as well. Opportunities in detox. But primarily you're going to find that the place you are able to connect with sponsees is because they hear you share. They see your demeanor. They see you sit in the same seat at every time you go to that meeting. They see that you command respect of others. They see that you're working with others. They see you. They watch your actions. You're the person they're going to pick. And when they say, will you help me? You say, yes. No yes but. Just yes. Because you see, guys, here's the truth of it. God brings us together. It's a great miracle, and He's working for us. He gives us people that we can work with which will save our lives. If we refuse to enlarge and perfect our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, we don't survive. It's as simple as that. If you're having trouble with that concept, there's a little switch in your head. Turn that little switch to on. I'm ready. And they'll hear it, and they'll come to you. Try it. You'll find it works, doesn't it? You guys know. Janine knows. I remember when I told you that 7 years ago, however long ago. Boom, boom, boom. There they came. So now then, the 10th step is something which is the first of the 3 steps which will keep us close to God. Keeping close to God means, most importantly, that we stay absolutely current with our present circumstances. We have to know what's going on with us right now. We have to know if we are angry, if we are being dishonest, if we've fallen by the wayside selfishly, or in self-centered fear, or self-pity, or if fear has cropped up. We need to know that. And the 10th step teaches us to be aware as we go through each day of these things coming up. Now, don't fall into the trap of believing that the 10th step teaches us that God doesn't take away our defects. The 7th step is some kind of a fraud. That's balderdash. You see, the 10th step came about because our founders realized through hard experience that they were not perfect, that the world and all of its people would continue to threaten them, that threat equals fear, and fear equals the recurrence, the reoccurrence, the reappearance of defects. So they found they had to have a way to keep up with this. And the 10th step came about as a result of that. The 10th step you'll find on page 84. Please take a look at it right now. The 3 paragraphs which follow are sort of interim paragraphs between the 10th and 11th step. On page 84 we find in the paragraph which begins at the middle of the page. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory. Now, an inventory is a written list. Teach your sponsees to carry a little notebook so that they can write this stuff down during the day. Continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. Now the word "as" there is very important. It means that while we are making amends, we are also starting 10, 11, and 12. Because amends may go on for a long time. But we're not going to wait to finish our amends before we start working the 10th step. We've entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And what that means is understanding of God and effectiveness in carrying the message. Remember that in order to grow in understanding of our higher power, it's necessary for us to experience God in our lives. And we do that by taking one leap of faith after another. We let God in. Our effectiveness in carrying the message is a tremendously important thing. This is a part of our 12th step. It's part of our mission. The mission that we have to carry this message to others, and it's an integral part of our recovery and our continued sobriety. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So we're going to be taking inventory in the 10th step from now on, the rest of our lives, and we teach our sponsees the same thing. If they get a little funny about it, tell them sorry. That's just the way it is. Now these next sentences are the 10th step. It's very simple. We're going to continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Page 84. Continue to watch, which means to inventory selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear when they come up during the day. And that's our 4th step, brought forward to our 10th step. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. That's our 7th step, brought forward to our 10th step. We discuss them with someone immediately. That's our 5th step, brought forward to our 10th step. And make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. That's our 9th step, brought forward to our 10th step. Now you see how all of these things work together. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. That's our 12th step. So that's a bridge from the 10th to the 12th step. And love and tolerance of others is our code. That does not mean a state of mind, a loving or tolerant state of mind. It means loving action and tolerant action. Just as faith without works is dead, love without the action of love is nothing. Tolerance without being tolerant is nothing. It's nothing but a bunch of electrons running around in our skulls. Doesn't mean anything. Everything in our program, you teach your sponsees this, has to do with what we do, what our actions are. Love without the action of love is simply a dead state of mind. If you find yourself saying, I love somebody, but you are unwilling to act toward them with love, you better look to see what your definition of the word love really is. And then it goes on to tell us that we have been restored to sanity. It tells us this has happened automatically. It tells us that the promise which we received all the way back in chapter 4, remember, where it told us that this book was written for us so that we could find a power greater than ourselves which would solve our problem. And here it tells us the problem has been solved. It does not exist for us. We no longer have the obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol, and the craziness, the insanity of that first drink is gone. And we didn't even swear off. You must teach your sponsees that there isn't a word in the big book about don't drink. The whole program is based not on don't drink, it's based on find God. Find God and surrender to God. That's the solution we offer. That's the solution of the 12 steps. Swearing off has never worked before, and it's not going to work now. We don't tell people don't drink and go to meetings. We don't insult them that way. We just got through telling them you can't not drink because you're powerless over alcohol. And then would we turn around and say, but by the way, don't drink? They think you're nuts. I think people are nuts in our meetings every time I hear that stuff. There's a terrible misunderstanding about what's going on here. If I'm an alcoholic and I'm powerless over alcohol, it means precisely that I can't not drink. Precisely. And then to say to somebody, well, keep it green, remember your last drink, just don't drink if your butt falls off, put it in a little red wagon and drag it to a meeting. It's insulting. And it's extraordinarily dangerous. Because think about the new person who hears this stuff and believes it. That somehow or another their sponsor or their these people that hang out in our meetings have imbued them magically with the power to not drink. Or that somehow if they're afraid of the consequences of their next drunk, that they won't drink. Fear of consequences never kept us sober. Fear does not keep us sober. And the treatment centers that think that we're going to stay sober because they pump us full of knowledge about ourselves. That doesn't work either. Self-knowledge doesn't keep anybody sober. You see, if all of that stuff worked, there would be no reason for AA. We wouldn't have to be here. There'd be no reason for the 12 steps. All you'd need would be a competent psychologist to sit down and help you figure out what's wrong with you. Get all that knowledge, and then of course you wouldn't drink. And also to warn you about all of the triggers. That's another concept which is utterly ridiculous. We don't need any damn triggers. When our mind says drink, we say yes sir or yes ma'am, because we're nuts. We're insane. Now here we find that we have been restored to sanity. Goes on to tell us that we have but a daily reprieve, and that this is contingent on our staying spiritually fit. How are we going to do that? We got the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps to do that with. Tells us that every day we're supposed to surrender, and the proper use of our will is to will ourselves to make surrender. Nobody takes their will back. That's another big bunch of baloney. We just don't give it. Today, we have 3 basic tools for surrender. We ask God that His will be done. We ask Him to show us what our next step is to be. We deliberately in prayers make an act of surrender. We meditate. That's surrender. And we work with others. Those are the 3 tools we've been given to stay out of self every day if we're willing to use them. And you teach your sponsees to do this, and you monitor them, you get them used to doing it so it becomes a part of their life. It's what they do. That's our job. The second step told us that we're going to find God deep down within ourselves. Last paragraph on page 85 tells us that's what's happened. We commenced to sense the flow of God's Spirit into us. Now we know that God is Spirit, we are Spirit, He is of us and we are of Him. We find Him deep down inside ourselves. We become God conscious. Now our job is to go forward from there and to keep that we've just been given as this great gift. And we're going to do that by working our 11th step. Now the 11th step we find on pages 86, 87, 88. The 11th step is composed of 3 parts, not 2 parts, but 3 parts. The first part of the 11th step is a 11-step inventory, not 10-step, 11-step inventory. We find it set out in detail on page 86. We find 10 questions there which we must answer every night. And these 10 questions are designed specifically for us to find out if we've gotten off the path. if we've strayed from the chosen ideal, which is to practice these principles in all of our affairs. We look to see if we've been of maximum help to others, or whether we've been back grubbing around and taking and making decisions based on self. We look to see if we took care of the defects as they cropped up during the day, and if we didn't do our 10th step, we're going to have to take care of it tonight. And where we have gotten off the path, where we've strayed from the path, we found out back in our 4th step that we can be forgiven for doing that. And so, as a part of our 10th step inventory, the first full paragraph on page 86, we ask God forgiveness. Nobody even knows that that's there unless you teach them. Ask God's forgiveness and ask Him to show us how to do better tomorrow. Demonstrate our willingness to improve and to do better. That's the key. So that inventory is the first part. Then we have prayer and we have meditation. Prayer and meditation go together. Meditation is not optional. It's one of the major tools of recovery. Prayer and meditation are like Siamese twins. When we pray, it's somewhat like meditation. When we meditate, it's very much like prayer. Why should we meditate? Aside from the fact that it's one of the tools, aside from the fact that it's been proven over the eons to be an extremely important spiritual practice. Think of it practically. I was just talking to somebody at the break about this. Janine here is a very dear friend. And if I went to Janine and I asked Janine a very important question, and I was hoping that I would be able to receive an answer from her that would help me. But before she could answer my question, I'd turn my back on her and walk away. Would she not think I was not only rude but nuts? Why in the world did I ask the question in the first place if I wasn't willing to wait for the answer? That's what we do when we meditate. We listen. If you think of meditation as listening to God, it makes it very simple. Get quiet, for God's sakes, and listen. Just let go. Relax and take it easy. Ask God for help. Tell Him you need some help. Show me what you want me to do here, God, and I'll accept whatever answer you give me. Please show me how to have enough power that I can fulfill your will and be obedient to you. And then I'll listen. I'll listen to you. Tell me what you want me to do. And we listen. If you think of meditation that way, it makes it so bloody simple. Get quiet, relax, take it easy, and listen. It's a whole lot better at this stage especially if you have newcomers you're working with. Don't get them all bollocksed up with guided meditations and the phony electronic music and some of this other stuff, crystals and candles and incense and guys in saffron robes and how to sit and how to breathe. I mean, all that stuff is probably okay. But how the hell are you going to do that if you need to meditate and you're at work and somebody's been giving you a bad time and you're all upset and you know you got to get this report done? You need God's help right now. Say a little prayer, disappear into the men's room or the ladies' room and sit quiet for 2 minutes and just let God have it. And boy, that really works. The problem with all this ashram stuff is you can't carry it around in your hip pocket of your purse. Why not learn to just go to God and be quiet and listen to Him? Because that's what He really likes. He wants you to be concentrating on Him, not on some thing about blowing up troubles all into a balloon and letting it float out the window. Or regressing back to your childhood and forgiving your father and all that stuff. I don't know about you, I do know about you. When somebody's talking to me and I'm trying to meditate, it pisses me off. And then they put on this crappy music, all that electronic stuff. And I'm listening to that and I'm saying, where is all the discordance going? I can't stand this stuff. It sounds like Shostakovich had a had a brain fart. I don't want this. I want to be quiet and listen to my higher power. And when I do that, I get to be inspired. Not all the time, but enough times that it makes it well worthwhile to do it every day. And pretty soon, if you do that enough, I promise you, you'll come to rely upon it. You teach your sponsees to meditate. And prayer is prayer that is never directed toward what I want you to do, God. We do not give God directions. We don't pray for ourselves. We don't pray for what we want. Now, you may belong to religion which tells you that if you pray, you'll get what you pray for, and that you ask and it shall be given you, and so on, so on. I mean, if that's what you believe, there's nobody here is trying to tell you differently. But the Big Book tells us that in our practice, in our spiritual practice, we're asking only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. Now, stop and think about how absolutely consistent that is with your third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. An unconditional offer. Right? So now we violate that whole offer. We say, by the way, God, I'd like a Beamer SUV because it had lots of room. I can take a lot of people to meetings. And then there's this other joker in the pack. God, I would sure enjoy having a better job, a house on the bay, 50-foot mast views, and a trophy blonde. If it be Thy will.
Oh, yes, it does.
See, we always, if we prayed at all before we got here, we were telling God what to do. Now we stop doing that. Do we mean it when we say, Thy will, not mine, be done? Do we mean it when we say, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt, taking my wants out of it altogether? Do we mean it or do we not? And if we do, we will have no problem praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And that, my friends, is what really works. And as soon as we put these things in God's hands, He does for us 10 times better than we ever could do for ourselves. That's the truth of it. The minute we get ourselves out of the equation and keep God in the equation, man, it just works. And once you've begun to experience that, you'll never be without it. That's what you do with your sponsees. You get them to experience it. And pretty soon, they wouldn't be without it either. It's a new way of life. Everything they knew when they got here was wrong. Everything you knew when you got here was wrong. We had to start over again. We have to make a 180-degree turn. And the interesting thing about it is that everything that you know now, none of it was your idea. I haven't had an original thought since I got here. Don't need them. It's all in the book, it's all in experience, and it's all the stuff that you and God have taught me. I could never in 1,000, a million years have ideated this program. And just think about it. If we had to think and philosophize our way through these steps, we would never make it. Stop and think about how they were written. 30 minutes. The 200 words which are changing the world. The 200 words which have been responsible with God's grace for the recovery of millions of alcoholics and others who have life-threatening problems. Millions. And where in the world did that come from? I promise you, Bill Wilson never thought about it. Bill Wilson was sick to his stomach. He thought he had ulcers that night. He, lying in his bed, he picked up a pad of paper and started writing. Boom, 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 boom. 30 minutes later, there they were. He looked up and he said, my God, there's God up there in the second step. and liberally all the way through, and the steps turned out to be 12. You know why he wrote them out that way? Because he wanted to make sure that we alcoholics didn't have any wiggle room, because he knew we would wiggle if we could. He did not want there to be any doubt about how this was to be done. And now we've got New Age AA people all over the place that have emasculated and prostituted the steps to a point where you can't even recognize them. It's a damn shame, because people are dying every day because they are not being helped. It's a damn shame. Let's not be guilty of that. All the steps are in the book, and the directions for working them are in the book. And that's what millions of people have used to recover. Why in the world do you suppose we're here at all? If this stuff didn't work, we wouldn't be here. There'd be no AA. There would not be another 50 or 100 12-step programs out there. And they all work for the people who work the steps. 12 steps are for everybody, you know. That's what Tommy and I are working on. A book that has that as its thesis. 12 steps are for everybody. Not just us. We don't own them. Why? Because they're spiritual principles that apply to every single human being equally. Our big advantage is that we got knocked down so hard that we were actually willing to do it. Thank you, God, for that. And then finally we have a 12-step. Did anybody ever stop to think what a spiritual awakening is? It's not defined anywhere in the big book. The term is used only once, and that's in the 12th step. Why? Because when Bill wrote the steps originally, the term was spiritual experience. And we find spiritual experience scattered all the way through the big book, don't we? The editorial committee changed spiritual experience to spiritual awakening. So what is it? Nowhere is it defined. We can identify it very clearly just from being cognizant of what's in the book. Spiritual awakening is going to bring us a degree of humility and honesty and gratitude that we never had before. It's going to bring us close to God. It means that we will become God conscious, conscious of the God within. Spiritual awakening means that we have the power, if we wish to use it, to be in concert with our higher power, that we can hear God, that we can be inspired by Him, that we've gone from that place where we were blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit to a place where we've entered the world of the Spirit. We've been restored to sanity. That's all part of the spiritual awakening. We're no longer crazy. Our minds have been restored to their original condition. It's kind of like taking a 1957 Ford Thunderbird, which is all rusty, sitting out in the back in the farmer's field covered with kudzu. That was us. You go in there with a wrecker truck and you pull that sucker out and you take it down to the bare frame and you start scraping off the rust. And if you work on it long enough and hard enough, you end up with a brand new Ford Thunderbird. Everything bright and shiny and new and runs like a top. That's us. We can do that. You have to work at it. So your job as a sponsor is to teach your sponsees the work they must do. Show them how to do it. Help them do it. And then help them to become disciplined and consistent in doing the work every day. If you're going to do that, you better be doing it too. By our works will be known. By our actions will be known. Your third step prayer, remember what you ask. You ask God to make an example of you so you could be helpful to others. An example of His power working in your life, and His love, and His way of life. And He does that for you. By the time you get to 12 steps, that prayer has been answered. Now it's up to us to stay that way. And if we get off the path, we ask God for forgiveness and ask Him to show us how to do better. And we redouble our efforts. None of us is being nominated, I don't think any of us being nominated for sainthood. I don't believe I'd want that anyway. It usually requires that be some kind of a martyr. I don't have any desire to be a martyr. But we do get to have spiritual growth every day if we wish to, because we have all the tools to do that with. The big book tells us how to work with a newcomer, and that in our 12-step work with newcomers is all laid out in the first 7 or 8 pages of chapter 7. And that working with newcomers is the result of the trial and error and the input of Dr. Silkworth and Bill's first attempts and then his later attempts, and how he taught others and how this evolved and how they came to understand that they had to first establish with the newcomer their credibility, their bona fides, that they knew what they were talking about. And it's a very simple formula. First we tell them how we drank. We tell them what alcohol did to us. We tell them how we tried to stop and couldn't. So now they know that we were there before them. They know that we know what we're talking about when it comes to alcohol. Then we tell them about the disease, and we hit them over the head with a sledgehammer. We don't spare that at all. We let them know that this disease is invariably fatal, and it is incurable and progressive. And that if they do not stop drinking, they will die. But they can't stop on their own. But there's the rub. There's the dilemma. If they're still interested, then we tell them how we recovered. And we stress the spiritual freely. We don't hide God on them. We don't beat around the bush. We don't try to explain our recovery based upon our faithful attendance at outpatient therapy sessions or our frequent use of medications, or the fact that we sit on some psychiatrist's couch 3 times a week. We don't try to explain our recovery that way. All that stuff's been around forever. If we're going to tell them how we recovered, we're going to talk about the steps, and we're going to talk about God. And that's what the big book tells us to do right there at that first meeting. No pussyfooting around. Stress the spiritual freely, it says. Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? If I'm going to tell you how I recover and I leave God out of the equation, I'm lying to you. I'm lying. For what purpose? The big book tells us if he or she is to find God, the desire must come from within. We can't give it to them. But we got to tell them the truth. Then we tell them to read the book, and after they read the book, we ask them if they want to go through the steps. If they want to go through the steps, we take them immediately to the steps. There's no pussyfooting around there either. Big book is quite clear about that. Read the book, go to the steps. When I came in, if you hadn't finished your 9th step in 90 days, there was something wrong. I was 47 days on my 11th step, and I was slow. I've taken people through the steps in 6 days. And they're sober too, and they're doing well. See, the question is not how long it takes. The question is, do you do it? The promises don't have anything to do with length of time. But the big book sure as hell does. There are time limits in that book. Did you realize that? Between 3rd and 4th step, what's the time limit? At once. Between the 5th and 6th step, what's the time limit? 1 hour. And the 7th step follows immediately. And the 8th step's already been done. And between the 9th and 10th step, the 10th step is begun as we do the 9th step. See, they say, oh, there's no time limits in the book. That's a bunch of baloney. It means that people who are saying these kind of things never read the book, or if they did, it was a long time ago and they've forgotten. Deliberately maybe forgotten because it doesn't fit in with New Age AA ideas. After all, that bunch of old white guys were sitting back there, all those middle-aged and upper white guys, probably sitting around smoking their cigars, and they were all religious nuts anyway, most of them. What the hell did they know about this? They wrote this book. But we know better because we got all the modern stuff. And so what do? We put the big book aside and we say, give me the 12 and 12. Why? The 12 and 12 doesn't tell you how to do anything. There are no directions in there. It's a group of essays about the steps. Not one direction in that whole book for working the steps. Now then, isn't that wonderful? We can read the 12 and 12. We do a reading meeting. We read a step in the 12 and 12. Then we discuss it. And what have we learned? Well, there's maybe some nice philosophy or something in there. Do we know anything more about the step than we did before? Do we know how to work it? Do you know how it fits into this whole program of action? No. The beautiful thing for New Age AAers is that now, since there's no direction to 12 and 12, we get to make up all our own. Now, no holes are barred. We can just make up anything we want, and we can call it Big Book, which Hazelton and Joe and Charlie and all the rest of them, they say this 4-step comes out of Big Book. That's baloney. They have emasculated it. They've taken the guts out of it. They've made it a joke because they've set up comparative fault, and the Big Book never does that. Comparative fault means I compare their fault with my fault, compare the harm they did me with the harm I did them. We meet in the middle, and son of a gun, everything cancels everything else out, so therefore I'm not supposed to have any resentments. It's crazy. Doesn't work. And on and on and on. I'm sorry, I get a little carried away with this stuff, but we're going to work. I'm hoping, I'm praying that all of you in this workshop will be so convinced that the Big Book is where the instructions are that you will not stray from it, either for yourself or, yes, Susan.
Can I mention about meditation?
Sure.
Since Jim was talking about the meditation meeting on Sunday nights, Jim conducts a meditation meeting on a private beach in Delray, Sunday night, 7 p.m. We sit in a big circle and he reads things about prayer and meditation, which time it is, and then we share on it. So see me after the meeting if you're interested at 7 p.m. Sunday night, Delray Beach.
You forgot to tell them about that helicopter was floating around up there the other night. I guess they were trying to check us out, see if maybe we were shooting dope or something.
There was 2 or 3 helicopters, right?
Destroying meditation.
Yeah.
Okay, next week we'll get back on track. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to do this recap of the steps. It was very important that we do this, and I hope it was helpful to you. And I want to thank you all for being here, and let's close the meeting. Let this circle represent the unity of our fellowship. Have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering. And then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. In our little group, we don't say anything after we say amen. Thank you. Lord's Prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks all for being here. See you next week, God willing, and the creek don't rise.